The winter of 1944 did not arrive in Europe like a season. It arrived like a verdict. The Ardennes forest slept under a suffocating blanket of snow. Deep, silent, murderous snow that swallowed sound, swallowed warmth, swallowed hope. Pines sagged under its weight, their branches frozen stiff like the fingers of dead men. The sky was a color without name, a flat shade of iron that felt too heavy for heaven. Wine did not blow. It cut. The cold was a predator, patient and hungry. And somewhere in that frozen maze of trees, surrounded on all sides, shivering in foxholes carved from ice and dirt, was the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army. They were supposed to be resting. They were supposed to be recovering from Normandy, from Holland, from battles that already aged them decades in months. But war does not care for rest. War does not wait. War hunts. And in December 1944, the German army, battered, cornered, desperate, gathered its last strength into a single violent punch, the Battle of the Bulge. It was meant to break the Allies apart. It was meant to force a surrender. It was meant to change the war. The 101st found themselves thrown into the center of the storm, rushed into the Ardennes with almost no ammunition, no winter clothing, no supplies, and no time. Their destination: Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town whose fate would determine the outcome of the war. A place about to become hell. A place about to become legend. The march into the storm, they arrived before dawn, exhausted, shivering, their breath hanging in the air like ghosts. Trucks stalled in the snow. Many marched on foot, boots cracking from frost. Some wrapped blankets around themselves, others wore curtains torn from bombed-out houses. When they reached the outskirts of Bastogne, the forest was quiet. Too quiet. Then the first shell fell. It struck a farmhouse and tore it into dust. The air shook. Snow lifted off the ground in waves, turning the world white and blind. The Germans were already there, already surrounding them, already tightening the noose. The paratroopers dug in. Their shovels rang against frozen earth. Hands bled. Teeth chattered. Someone joked weakly that the cold hurt less if you stopped caring. No one laughed. The snow kept falling. The first day at noon, the Germans launched their first assault. A probing attack meant to test the Americans' strength. It came from the tree line. Gray shapes moving with the snow, rifles low, machine guns supporting. 101st fought back, thin lines of men firing until their rifles jammed from the cold. Helmets rang with bullets. Bodies dropped into the snow like stones into a silent lake. The wounded moaned for medics. Trudging, sliding, stumbling through snow that reached up to their knees. A young medic named Sam Carter knelt beside a soldier whose leg was a ruined mess of red ice. Sam's hands shook. He pressed bandages that froze stiff as he applied them. The soldier whispered, "Tell my mom," and Sam forced himself to smile. "You'll tell her yourself," he lied. Because medics always lied. The soldier died minutes later. Sam closed his eyes. The wind wailed. Snowflakes covered the man's face until it looked like marble. One of the officers said softly, "The snow eats our dead." He was right. Bodies vanished under white within hours. What remained like lumps of ice? The living stepped around them like broken statues. Bastogne had become a graveyard made of silence. The encirclement. By December 20th, the town was completely surrounded. Every road out was cut. Every supply line severed. Every escape impossible. From the north, German tanks. From the east, infantry divisions. From the south, artillery. From the west, armored vehicles prowling the roads like predators. A perfect ring of steel. The 101st was trapped, and the Germans knew it. They opened fire every morning, every afternoon, every night. Shells shrieked overhead and crashed into buildings, splitting stone and timber. Houses collapsed into piles of splinters. Fires burned until the snow smothered them. The sound never stopped. The ground trembled constantly. The sky flinched with each explosion, but the Americans did not move. They held. Cold turned their rifles into iron bars. Hunger hollowed their faces. Sleep became something only the dead enjoyed. Yet they held. Someone carved into a wooden beam in a ruined barn, "If you want Bastogne, come take it." The Germans would try. The ghost in the trees on the third night. A strange figure appeared in the forest. Private Dane Wilson, a sentry standing in a foxhole near the northern perimeter, saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. At first he thought it was a deer. Then he realized the shape was too human, too deliberate. He raised his rifle. "Stop, or I'll shoot!" No response. The figure came closer. Slow, silent, unnatural. Dane fired. The shot echoed through the frozen trees. The figure collapsed. When the patrol reached it, they found a German soldier, frozen solid, his body stiff, his eyes open, snow packed into his mouth as if death itself had silenced his last scream. He hadn't been shot. He had been dead for hours. The wind had moved him, dragged him across the snow like a puppet. The men did not speak of it. But that night, no one patrolled alone. Bastogne was not only a battlefield now, it was a place of ghosts. The shelling of December 22 morning brought a storm of artillery so brutal that veterans said later they had never experienced anything like it. Shells fell every 3 seconds, trees shattered, showering razor-sharp splinters. A foxhole collapsed on 2 men, burying them alive before anyone could dig them out. Corporal Tom Reeves crawled through the carnage, calling for survivors. He found only pieces, gloves with hands still inside, helmets filled with blood, boots with frozen feet still attached. He vomited into the snow. Then he kept searching, because that was all they could do. The shelling stopped at noon. The Germans then sent a messenger under a white flag with a written ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. The note was brought to the American commander, General Anthony McAuliffe. He read it, snorted, wrote back one word: nuts. The messenger didn't understand, but the Americans did. It meant, we do not surrender. Ever, ever. The men cheered weakly, frost-bitten lips cracking as they forced smiles. For the first time in days, hope flickered, but hope is fragile in winter. And Bastogne was not finished with them yet. The night that would not end. As darkness fell, the cold deepened to something monstrous. Temperatures dropped below 20 C. Fires died. Water froze solid in canteens. Men huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat like animals. Some never woke up. Others woke screaming, their feet black and dead from frostbite. Artillery rained again. Screams punctured the night. Wolves howled in the forest, drawn by the smell of blood. And through it all, the 101st held on. Barely, desperately, stubbornly, waiting for the sky to open. Waiting for relief, waiting for a miracle. They didn't know it yet, but something was coming for them through the snow, something roaring like thunder, something armored, unstoppable. Its name was Patton, and he was racing toward Bastogne faster than the winter winds. But the men in the foxholes didn't know that. All they knew was this: the night was not over, and neither were they. Dawn did not truly come to Bastogne on December 23rd. The sky merely shifted from black to a lighter shade of despair, a bruised gray that offered no warmth, no comfort, no promise. The forest remained frozen in silence, its branches drooping like mourning arms. But beneath that silence, something moved. The Germans had returned, not as marching columns, not as tanks grinding through ice, but as ghosts in white. The silent assault. Private Joe Rourke was the first to notice it. A faint distortion among the trees. A ripple in the whiteness. Something too smooth, too controlled, too alive to be wind. He blinked snowflakes from his lashes and squinted. The forest stared back. Then it shifted, barely. A shape. A man, wrapped in white camouflage from boots to helmet. Then another. And another. Contact. Joe whispered. But the word left his throat like frost, barely audible. Then the forest erupted. German infantry, dressed head to toe in winter whites, surged forward in silence. Their boots made no sound on the snow. Their breath was invisible in the cold. They slipped between the trees like creatures made of frost. The Americans scrambled. Rifles jammed. Fingers trembled. Teeth chattered. The enemy came fast, faster than cold hands could raise weapons. Machine guns spat fire. Snow exploded into clouds. Men dove into foxholes, pulling their scarves over their faces. Sergeant Bill Hanley shouted, "Hold the line! Hold the damn line!" But the line was ice, and ice can break. The first breakthrough at the northern perimeter, the Germans overran 2 foxholes before anyone even realized what the attack was coming from. Their bullets were muffled by snow, their movements hidden by white camouflage. Private Michael Connors swung his BAR toward the movement but couldn't see where to fire. Everything was white, moving, shifting, blending. Then a German soldier lunged out of the whiteness, bayonet first. Michael fired from the hip. The recoil nearly tore the weapon from his frozen hands. The white figure fell, staining the snow with a spreading black-red patch. But more came. Michael screamed for his squad leader. No answer. Then he saw why. His sergeant lay face down in the snow, his helmet cracked clean through. The hospital, in the church meanwhile, in the center of Bastogne, the wounded were being treated in the cold stone church of St. Pierre. The church was dark, candles guttering in the draught, stained glass windows cracked from shell fire. The pews had been broken apart to make space for the wounded. Nurses worked with bare hands until they bled. Medics stitched wounds with numb fingers. The air smelled of iodine, blood, and smoke. A dying soldier grabbed the sleeve of a medic and whispered, "Are they angels?" The medic didn't know if he meant the nurses, or the shapes in white moving through the trees outside. The forest turns red back on the perimeter. The fighting intensified. The German attack was designed to be quiet, but combat is never quiet for long. Gunfire cracked through the woods. Grenades thumped. Screams cut through the wind like torn wire. Joe Rourke crouched behind a fallen log with 2 magazines left and frostbite gnawing at his fingertips. Bullets shaved bark off the trunk above his head. "Where are they coming from?" he shouted. "Everywhere," someone answered. And they were. The Germans were using the snow as their ally, vanishing into drifts, reappearing behind stumps, crawling on their stomachs like wolves stalking prey. A machine gun jammed. A mortar round fell short. A medic was shot tending to a wounded man. The forest became a maze of white death. The howl of the 502 and then, from the ridge to the east, came a roar. A raw, furious war cry. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment counterattacked. Men who had been freezing moments earlier now charged forward with bayonets fixed, shouting through teeth so cold they could barely open their mouths. They weren't charging because it was tactically smart. They were charging because it was the only choice left. The 502nd slammed into the German flank with the fury of starving wolves. Gunfire flashed. Men grappled hand-to-hand in the snow, boots slipped in blood. Private Connors, shaking, saw one of his friends taken down by a German. He fired. His rifle clicked empty. The German rose, blade ready. Connors grabbed a frozen branch from the ground and swung it with all the strength terror could give him. The branch shattered. The German fell. Connors fell beside him. Both men breathed steam into the icy air. One got up. The other didn't. The cost of holding after an hour, the Germans retreated back into the woods, leaving behind dozens of bodies. White forms sprawled across the snow like broken statues. The Americans, too, had paid a price. Many foxholes were empty now. Blood froze into dark patches on the ground. Some soldiers sat in silence, staring at their hands as if they no longer recognized them, and some, Some didn't speak at all anymore. Sergeant Hanley limped along the line, checking survivors. "Any of ours captured?" he asked. A private nodded. 3, maybe 4. Hanley looked out into the trees and muttered, "God help them." Because everyone in Bastogne knew what the SS did to prisoners. The sky cracks open then, for the first time in days, something miraculous happened. The clouds broke. A thin crack of blue appeared overhead. At first, no one believed it. Then someone screamed, "Look! Look at the sky!" Men crawled out of foxholes, shaking, filthy, frostbitten, barely alive. But they looked. The sky was opening. For the first time in a week, they could see the sun. And within an hour, a distant hum, growing louder, stronger, full of promise and fire. American C-47 sport aircraft, supply planes, the angels of the 101st. They parachuted crates of ammunition, food, medicine, and winter boots. Some crates burst on impact. Some drifted into German lines. But enough reached the men to give them strength. Soldiers wept openly as they tore open boxes of rations. One man held a chocolate bar to his chest like a holy relic. Hope had returned, but hope never comes alone. With it came the knowledge that the Germans would attack again, and harder. And soon, the night before the Armor assault at dusk, scouts reported a terrifying sight. Tigers, panthers, stugs, dozens of them. German armor massing for a breakthrough. Footprints in the snow, tank tracks inching forward, engines rumbling like distant thunder. The men in the foxholes knew what that meant. The wolves in white had been only the beginning. The real monsters were coming. And nothing stood between Bastogne and annihilation except a few thousand frozen men with too little ammunition and too much courage. Sergeant Hanley whispered, "Tomorrow, hell arrives." He was wrong. Hell was already there. Hell wore snow. Hell walked on iron treads. Hell growled beneath the pines, waiting for sunrise. And the 101st Airborne, surrounded and outnumbered, prepared to face it, alone. Dawn on December 24th did not arrive as light. It arrived as sound. A low, steady rumble at first, like distant thunder rolling under the earth. Then heavier, closer, layered, mechanical. The kind of sound that crawls into bone and whispers a single word. Tanks. The men of the 101st Airborne lay in their frozen foxholes, staring at the tree line, fingers wrapped around rifles that already felt too small. The forest was a wall of gray and white. No movement. No birds. No wind. But the ground vibrated. Private Joe Rourke licked cracked lips and muttered, "Here we go." No one answered. Words felt useless now. The vibration grew stronger. Snow jumped in small puffs with each tremor. Somewhere to the south, a dog began to howl, a long, mournful sound that cut through the tension like a broken violin. Then the first tank emerged from the trees. A tiger, massive, angular, a beast of steel and hate. Its barrel swung slowly, sniffing the air. Behind it came others, panthers, stugs, armored half-tracks. German infantry walked in their shadow, hunched against the cold, rifles slung, faces set in grim determination. From above, it would have looked like a swarm of metal locusts spilling across a field of snow. From the foxholes, it looked like the end of the world. The first shots the American artillery opened up first. Shells screamed overhead and crashed into the advancing formation, sending fountains of snow, dirt, and metal into the air. One stug vanished in a plume of black smoke. A half-track flipped onto its side. Men scattered, slipped, fell, got up, and kept moving. The tanks did not stop. Their treads chewed through craters as if they were puddles. Their armor plates shed small arms fire like rain. Their engines roared. "You gotta be kidding me," Michael Connors muttered, watching bullets from a .30 cal bounce off a tiger's front armor like pebbles. The tank fired. The blast hammered the air. A building near the town's edge exploded, collapsing into itself. Shards of brick flew like shrapnel. A paratrooper caught a piece in the throat and dropped wordlessly into the snow. Connors fired anyway. He fired because that's what you do. You shoot at the monster even if your bullets are nothing more than snowflakes against its hide. Tank vs. Trees. The Ardennes were not tank country. The dense forest, steep ravines, and narrow roads made maneuver difficult. Tigers were powerful. Every turn had to be measured, every advance calculated. The 101st exploited that. They didn't try to fight the tanks in open ground. They turned the forest into a weapon. At one choke point near a tight bend in the road, a group of engineers had rigged explosives to a cluster of trees. They waited until the lead tank, a panther, was beneath the branches. Now, someone whispered. The charges blew. Tree trunks, thick and heavy, cracked and fell like guillotines. The panther's turret was crushed beneath the weight. Its engine screamed, then died. The tanks behind it couldn't move forward. The ones behind them couldn't reverse fast enough. The road became a metal traffic jam. The artillery found them then. Shells rained down, turning half the column into burning wrecks and tangled steel. The forest lit up. For a moment, in the orange glow, the snow looked like ash. The town in flames, Bastogne itself, was not spared. German artillery replied in kind, saturating the town with shells. Buildings that had survived days of bombardment finally gave in. Roofs collapsed. Walls toppled. Fires spread from house to house. The church, the makeshift hospital, shook as shells landed nearby. Stained glass shattered inward. Snow and glass fell together like strange, deadly confetti. Inside, medics shielded the wounded with their own bodies. A nun knelt beside a boy with shrapnel in his chest and recited prayers in a whisper drowned by explosions. A doctor shouted for more bandages. A nurse replied, "We're out!" The doctors stared at his bloody hands. Then tear up the sheets. They did. They turned linen into lifelines and kept working. Outside, the tanks crept closer. Close encounter. At one point on the southern perimeter, a Tiger tank rolled so close to a foxhole that the ground above the men shook with each clanking step. Private Sam Carter, the medic, lay inside that hole with a wounded soldier whose leg was gone from the knee down. The man was delirious, mumbling about home, about a dog named Lucky, about a girl with red hair. The Tiger rolled overhead, so near that snow sifted down from the edges of the foxhole like flour. Sam pressed his hand over the soldier's mouth. "Don't move," he breathed. "Don't make a sound." The tank paused. For a horrifying moment, the massive machine idled above them, engine grumbling, treads whining. Then it moved on. Sam waited another full minute before lowering his hand. The soldier stared at him with wild eyes. Sam forced a smile. "Lucky," he said hoarsely. "Seems like your dog's name worked." The man laughed once, a broken sound, then passed out. Sam kept working, because that's what medics do. Keep working until there's nothing left to save. Desperate measures, the paratroopers had very few anti-tank weapons. A handful of bazookas, some 57mm anti-tank guns that struggled against heavy armor. Mines, if they were lucky. But luck was scarce in Bastogne, so they improvised. At a narrow road leading into town, Sergeant Hanley and his squad waited behind a snowbank, shivering. They had Molotov cocktails, bottles filled with fuel and stuffed with rags, and a bazooka with only 2 rounds left. The first Panther appeared. It rolled forward, no infantry support, overconfident, blind. Hanley shouted. A Molotov sailed through the air and shattered the back of the tank, flames licking over the engine deck. The second bottle followed, then the third. Fire spread. The tank's crew panicked. They scrambled out of the hatch and into a hail of bullets. The bazooka team fired the first round at the next tank. The rocket slammed into the front plate and bounced off, detonating uselessly in the snow. Son of a, the loader began. Side shot, Hanley yelled. Get the side. They waited, hearts pounding, until the tank began to turn to face them. The bazooka fired again. This time the rocket hit the treads. The tank froze, crippled, smoke pouring from its side. Hanley exhaled. Then the next wave of tanks arrived. The battle for the crossroads. At the center of Bastogne lay a crossroads. A simple junction of roads that, on any other day in history, would have meant nothing. In this battle, it meant everything. Whoever held that junction controlled movement through the town. Whoever controlled movement controlled the battle. The Germans threw infantry and armor at it in repeated waves. The Americans threw everything they had back: machine guns, rifle fire, hand grenades, curses, but courage. Fighting was so close that men on opposite sides could hear each other's breath. They killed at distances measured in feet, not yards. A half-track burst into flames at the corner of the junction, turning the snow into a pool of sludge. For a moment, the crossroads fell silent. Smoke, blood, bodies, broken glass. Then a lone figure walked into the center of the intersection, a communications officer dragging a reel of cable behind him. He lurched forward, ducking instinctively at each distant explosion, laying line while stray rounds snapped past. "Are you insane?" someone shouted from a doorway. "Can't call artillery," the man panted. "If we can't talk to them." He kept going. He reached the opposite side. The line held. Artillery spoke again. The crossroads remained in American hands. The whisper of heroes that night. As the worst of the tank assault subsided, something strange happened. The men in the foxholes began to talk. Not about tactics, not about orders, about home, about mothers and fathers, about girls they wanted to marry, about jobs they'd left behind, about the first hot meal they would eat when the war was finally over. They spoke not because they believed they would have those things. They spoke because clinging to those images was the only way to stay human in a place that was trying very hard to turn them into ghosts. Private Connors said, "When I get out of here, I'm never being cold again. Florida. Arizona. I don't care. Somewhere where the snow is just a picture." Joe Rourke chuckled weakly. "I just want a full pack of cigarettes and 8 hours of sleep." Sam Carter, the medic, sat in a doorway, his hands still red and stiff from blood and cold. He stared at them for a long time before whispering, "I just want a day where my hands don't ruin everything they touch." No one answered, because they all understood. Christmas in hell, it was Christmas Eve. There were no carols in Bastogne, no candles in windows, no presents under trees. But someone, somewhere, had found a tiny Christmas tree, half-burned missing branches, and stuck it in the snow near a command dugout. It leaned at an angle, like it was too tired to stand straight. A single strip of tinsel clung to one branch. On the tree, someone hung a German dog tag. On another branch, an American one. A message: "No one leaves this place untouched." Later that night, in the battered church, a chaplain held a simple service. Soldiers sat on the floor between stretchers, helmets in their laps. There were no hymn books, no choir, only voices, hoarse and cracked, reciting a prayer they half remembered from childhood. "Deliver us from evil." Outside, a flare lit the sky green for a moment. Inside, a nurse hummed something that sounded like "Silent Night" under her breath while changing a bandage. The words did not matter anymore. Only the act of saying them did. The tanks had not broken Bastogne. The wolves in white had not broken it. Cold had not broken it. Fear had not broken it. But the men were close to the edge. Closer than any of them would admit. They didn't know how much longer they could hold. They didn't know if help was really coming. All they knew was this: tomorrow they would still be here. In the snow, in the cold, in the fire, still holding. Because that was what Bastogne demanded. Because that was what history would remember. Not the tanks, not the shells. The fact that they did not break. The morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, arrived in Bastogne not with peace, not with joy, not with hymns or rest, with the sky cracking open at last. For the first time in a week, the clouds thinned. Light, real light, filtered through the gray veil above. The sun appeared like a pale coin, weak but unmistakably there. And then came the sound, a distant drone, growing louder, multiplying, filling the sky. The men looked up with disbelief first, then with hope, with something close to tears. American aircraft, C-47s, P-47 Thunderbolts, supply gliders, fighters escorting transport planes. It felt unreal. It felt like salvation. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, all parachuting down in white and brown crates. Some got stuck in trees, some drifted off course, some shattered on frozen roofs. But enough made it. The men tore open packages with trembling hands: cigarettes, chocolate bars, canned meat, winter socks, bandages, morphine, warm gloves, radio parts, even letters from home. One soldier shouted, "God bless those flyboys." Another broke down, clutching a can of peaches like a treasure. But salvation never comes alone, and never without a price. The German counterstrike. The Germans saw the sky too. And they understood. If Bastogne received supplies, the 101st would not break. If the 101st would not break, the entire German offensive, Hitler's last gamble, would fail. So they attacked again, not probing, not cautiously, but violently. Artillery struck the drop zones. Machine guns raked the fields. Mortars fell like hail. The men ran from crater, grabbing whatever supplies they could. Some were shot carrying crates. Others dragged wounded friends to cover. One C-47 was hit by flak. Engines sputtered, smoke trailed. It tilted, spun, and smashed into a snowy field, exploding into flame. The men of Bastogne watched helplessly. A corporal whispered through chattering teeth, "They came for us, and we can't even save them." But even in fire, the sky remained open, and the planes kept coming, hundreds of them. Inside the hole, not all heroes fought with rifles. Some fought with saws, bandages, morphine, and silent hands. The church-turned-hospital was overflowing. Wounded men lay shoulder to shoulder on straw, blankets, jackets, anything that could keep them off the frozen floor. The air was thick with breath, blood, infection, and whispered prayers. Nurse Augusta Chewy, a volunteer from the Belgian Congo, worked with a calmness that bordered on supernatural. Shells shook the building. Dust fell from the rafters. Sometimes the candles went out. She did not stop. Not when a soldier screamed as a bullet was dug from his leg. Not when a man begged her to cut off his arm. Not when she saw death take 3 men in 1 hour. She simply said, "Next," and moved to the next cot. Dr. Jack Pryor, exhausted, bleeding from a gash in his scalp, looked at her and whispered, "You work like you don't feel the cold." She didn't respond. She did, but she ignored it. The wounded needed warmth, not sympathy. Sympathy didn't stop bleeding. Hands did. The lull before the storm. By mid-afternoon, the Germans paused their assaults. Snow fell softly. Light winds returned. Men rebuilt foxholes, cleaned rifles, tightened boots. They ate their first real food in days. For a moment, a single fragile moment, Bastogne felt like it could survive this. Private Connors shared a tin of peaches with 3 other men. Joe Rourke lit a cigarette and said it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Sam Carter washed blood from his gloves in melted snow, whispering names under his breath, the names of the men he couldn't save. Then a distant rumble rose again. Not tanks, not artillery, something else. A roar, huge, thunderous, growing stronger. Sergeant Hanley's eyes narrowed. "That's engines, big ones." Men scrambled up from their holes and stared through the trees. On the horizon, moving slowly, steadily, were shapes, dozens of them. Black silhouettes against the gray sky. Trucks, half-tracks, armored personnel carriers, An entire German infantry battalion, with artillery support, marching toward Bastogne like a judgment. Hanley spat into the snow. Looks like our Christmas is over. The mass attack the Germans struck all at once, from the north, the east, and the southeast. A three-pronged assault. Their goal was simple: break the perimeter, crush the defenders, take Bastogne before Patton arrived. Machine guns opened fire in long bursts. Mortars thumped rhythmically. Panzerfausts streaked across the snow. Men screamed orders in German. Whistles blew, boots crunched through ice, and the 101st Airborne responded with everything they had left. The perimeter became hell. Men kneeled in snow up to their thighs, firing rifles with hands they couldn't even feel. Bazooka teams sprinted between burning trees. Medics dragged screaming soldiers behind shattered logs. Hot metal hissed when it touched the snow. A mortar landed near Joe Rourke, blowing two men apart. He fell backward, ears ringing, face numb. A figure grabbed him, Hanley, and hauled him to his feet. No dying today. Mo moved. Joe moved, because Hanley dragged him forward like anger given form. The fall of 2nd Platoon on the eastern edge. 2nd Platoon was nearly wiped out. A machine gun nest was overrun. A foxhole filled with blood. A sergeant executed point blank when his rifle jammed. Private Connors saw one of his closest friends, Reed, pinned beneath a fallen tree, crying out for help. Connors ran to him, ignoring bullets snapping past his face. Reed begged. Connors lifted, pulled, screamed, fought the frozen wood. The tree didn't move. Connors looked into Reed's eyes, saw the truth there. A German squad began advancing toward them. Reed grabbed Connors' coat. "Go," he whispered. "Please, go." Connors shook his head violently. "I'm not." Reed shoved him. "Go, go." Connors went. He didn't hear the shots. He didn't look back. Some memories are born as scars. The counterattack in the pines, just when the line was about to collapse. A surprise counterattack came from the 4th Company, men who had been holding a reserve line deeper in the woods. They charged through the trees with grenades and rifles, shouting like madmen. Snow exploded around them. A German MG-42 swept the line, nearly cutting 3 men in half. But the counterattack worked. It stalled the advance. It bought time. It allowed the 101st to regroup. Barely. Sergeant Hanley rallied whoever was still breathing. "One more push. Hold them." They held. They held until their fingers bled through their gloves. They held until their voices went hoarse. They held until the forest grew quiet, until the German line wavered, until the tanks began to pull back, until the infantry broke, the attack faltered, then failed, then ended. Bastogne still stood. The price of holding when the battle finally ended, snow-covered bodies on both sides. Some lay curled as if sleeping. Some were torn apart. Some were frozen mid-crawl. Medics stumbled through the carnage, numb, exhausted, broken. Joe Rourke sat on the edge of a foxhole and stared at his hands. They shook uncontrollably. He didn't know if it was cold or fear, or that he'd survived when many better men didn't. Hanley placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. Joe nodded, but he didn't believe it. The snow fell gently, silently, covering the dead again. Because the Ardennes does not keep memories, it buries them. The message as night fell, a radio operator burst into the command post, breathless. "Signal from the south." McAuliffe looked up. "What is it?" "Sir, it's Patton." A silence, a sharp breath, a heartbeat. He says he's coming." McAuliffe exhaled. The men outside cheered weakly in the cold. They didn't have strength for much more. But they had hope, and hope in Bastogne was rarer than gold. December 26, 1944. The day the snow listened. For a week the men of Bastogne had lived like ghosts, shivering specters haunting frozen foxholes, surviving on hope, curses, and a stubborn refusal to die. Their world had shrunk to snow, shells, and the beating of their own terrified hearts. But on this morning, a new sound crawled across the frozen earth. A tremor, a vibration. A low hum turning into a rolling growl. At first the men thought it was another German attack. More tigers pushing through the forest to flatten what remained of them. But this sound was different. It was deeper. Hungrier, it vibrated in the ribs. It echoed in the frozen ground beneath their boots. Sergeant Hanley raised his head from a foxhole and muttered, "That's not German." And then the horizon shook. Patton arrives, the sound became a roar. Engines. Hundreds of them. The men of the 101st climbed out of their holes, fingers numb, faces blackened with smoke, eyes squinting through frost. Then they saw them, first as shapes, then as silhouettes, then as salvation made of steel. Sherman tanks, rows of them. Columns of them. Patton's Third Army, breaking through the snowstorm like a stampede of iron. Some Shermans bore scorch marks from previous fights. Some were missing side armor. Some carried infantry clinging to the hulls like determined shadows. But they were coming. They were coming for Bastogne. And nothing, not the weather, not German artillery, had stopped them. The men of Bastogne stared in disbelief. One soldier dropped to his knees and whispered, "Jesus, they actually made it." Another laughed, a broken hysterical sound that quickly turned into sobbing. Hanley closed his eyes and whispered, "About damn time." The breakthrough, but Patton's tanks weren't marching into an open gate. The Germans knew they were coming, and they were ready. The southern road into Bastogne was a narrow strip of frozen mud flanked by thick woods, perfect ground for an ambush. German Pak-40 anti-tank guns lay camouflaged beneath white netting. Mortar teams waited behind trees. Machine gunners braced their weapons on logs coated in ice. The first Sherman took a direct hit. The shell punched clean through the front armor and exploded inside the hull. Flames burst outward, black smoke rolling in. 3 men crawled out on fire, screaming, rolling in the snow that hissed as it touched their burning uniforms. The second tank was struck in the treads. It spun sideways, blocking the road. Infantry dove for cover. Bullets shredded branches overhead, but Patton's men did not retreat. They surged forward. More tanks pushed the wreck aside, engines screaming. Machine gunners returned fire. Infantrymen crawled through snow, grenades clenched between frozen fingers. The battle for the road turned the forest red. The snow burned away where flamethrowers swept. Trees shattered under direct hits. Shrapnel hissed through the white like angry hornets. And still the Shermans moved, 1 foot, 2 feet, 5 feet, a yard, 100 yards. They advanced not with speed, but with inevitability, like winter itself. Relentless, unstoppable. By noon, the German line cracked. By 1 o'clock, it collapsed. By 2, the Shermans were rolling freely toward Bastogne. The first Sherman enters Bastogne. Just after 4 p.m., the first Sherman tank, coated in mud and ice, paint scorched, turret dented, clattered into the southern outskirts of the town. The men of the 101st stared at it as if it were a myth brought to life. The tank commander popped out of the hatch. He grinned down at the paratroopers. "Merry Christmas, boys." The men cheered, weak, exhausted, hoarse, but it was the loudest sound Bastogne had heard in days. Someone shouted, "About damn time," another yelled. "Where the hell were you?" The tank commander laughed. "Fighting the same war you've been fighting, son." Sergeant Hanley shook the commander's hand. "You just saved a whole lot of men," he said quietly. The commander looked around at the shattered town, at the snow stained black with blood, at the faces of hollow-eyed men who had refused to break. "Looks like you saved yourselves." The town breathes again. Relief troops began pouring in. Infantry, medics, engineers. Fresh supplies arrived, ammunition, food, winter coats. Trucks unloaded crates in the town center. Medics rushed to the church hospital, taking over from exhausted nurses who collapsed in pews. Sam Carter watched a fresh medical team enter the hospital and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in days. "They made it," he whispered. A doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Get some sleep, Sam." He nodded, but he didn't move. Sleep felt like a stranger now. But the war was not over. The siege was broken, but the battlefield was still alive. German snipers remained hidden in the woods. Artillery still fell sporadically. Shells still crashed into the outskirts. Tanks still prowled the forest. Wolves howled again at sunset. And the men of the 101st, they were not done. They had to push the enemy back. Retake ground, clear roads, secure villages. Relief had come, but the nightmare was not over. Not yet. Patton meets the 101st later that night, General George S. Patton himself arrived on the edge of Bastogne. Snow whipped around him as he stepped from his command car, coat heavy with stars, pistol gleaming at his side. He approached General McAuliffe of the 101st. "You held," Patton said quietly. McAuliffe nodded. "We held." Patton looked around at the ruined town, the burned tanks, the dead in the snow, the men too tired to stand. "You did more than hold," he said. "You made history." McAuliffe didn't answer. His eyes were on the forest, because he knew the truth. The Battle of Bastogne was won. But the battle for the Ardennes was still raging, and the men who had survived the impossible were about to be sent into the fire. The ghosts stand up that night. As darkness fell again, the men of the 101st returned to their foxholes, not because they had to, but because they weren't done. Private Connors sat with his rifle across his knees, smoke rising from his breath. Joe Rourke cleaned his weapon slowly, methodically. Sam Carter wrapped new bandages around his frostbitten hands. Hanley paced the line, checking positions. The men were exhausted, frozen, half-starved, but unbroken. They had earned a new name, whispered among Patton's soldiers as they rolled through the wreckage. The Ghosts of Bastogne, not because they looked like ghosts, but because they should have been dead. And they weren't. The siege was broken. Patton had arrived. The men of the 101st Airborne had survived the impossible. But survival is not the end of war. And Bastogne was not done writing its story. Because the night after relief arrived, the night when soldiers finally believed they might live to see home again, the darkest hours of the Ardennes descended upon them. Not with tanks this time. Not with infantry. Not with artillery, but with something far more ancient and merciless, winter itself. The cold that kills. The temperature crashed that night, not dipped, not lowered, crashed below 25 C, wind slicing through coats like needles, breath freezing to scarves, water solidifying inside canteens. The forest groaned under the weight of ice, trees cracked like rifle shots. Branches snapped and crashed to the ground without warning. Medics found men asleep in foxholes, dead, frozen stiff. Others woke up screaming as their fingers turned black. One soldier smashed his own hand against a tree, trying to force life back into it. The wind did not pity them. It howled like a beast, climbing through broken roofs and shattered windows, rattling bones. The men who had faced tanks and infantry without flinching now curled into themselves, praying the cold wouldn't take them before dawn. It was the kind of night that steals the living and leaves their bodies sitting upright, eyes frozen open. The kind of night that turns breath to daggers. But the men held on, because that's what they did. The hunters in the dark snow muffled sound. Fog clung to the ground. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. And through this white oblivion, figures moved. German scouts, or what remained of them. Small groups. Starving, stranded behind the new American lines. They didn't attack in formation, they didn't march, they stalked, crawling on their bellies, dragging rifles, searching for a way out through the woods. but the ghostly men of the 101st Airborne saw them. And in the pitch-black forest, among twisted trees and snow-filled craters, the final hunt began. In the dark, in whispers, in breathless silence, shots fired with muffled recoil, throats slit swiftly, snow swallowing bodies without sound. For hours, the woods felt less like a battlefield and more like an ancient hunting ground, where predators wore dog tags and death wore a white coat. Joe Rourke crept through the trees with a Thompson in his hands. His breath puffed in front of him, a small cloud he prayed the enemy couldn't see. He heard movement to his left, slow, cautious. He spun. A German soldier, no older than 17, stared back at him with wide, terrified eyes. Frost coated the boy's eyebrows. His lips were purple. His rifle hung uselessly at his side. He whispered, "Bit, Nate." Joe hesitated. His finger froze on the trigger. The boy looked like he'd collapse if the wind blew too hard. Then the boy reached for something under his coat. Joe fired. The gunshot echoed through the forest. Joe stood shaking, staring at the body, at the hand half reaching for a grenade, at the boy who could have killed him. Hanley appeared behind him. "You did what you had to," he said quietly. Joe didn't answer. He knew Hanley was right. It didn't make the night feel any less haunted. Silence, finally broken by dawn, the woods fell silent again. The last scattered German scouts were dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. A few drifted into the dark and froze there, becoming pale shapes hunched under trees. The cold did what bullets could not, and the forest looked like a graveyard made entirely of snow. But as the sun rose, golden light struck the ice-covered branches and made them shimmer like chandeliers. Tiny crystals drifted from above, glittering in the air. For the first time in weeks, the men saw beauty. Just for a moment. Just for a breath. Just enough to remind them the world wasn't just fire and death. Then reality returned. The dead or counted soldiers walked the perimeter, retrieving the fallen. Some bodies were frozen in crawling positions, reaching for something they would never grasp. Others sat against trees with peaceful expressions, as if they had fallen asleep listening to the wind. Medics worked silently. For every enemy body, they found one of their own. Private Connors stumbled across a familiar face. Reed, the friend he had left behind under the tree days earlier. Snow had buried Reed up to the chest. His eyes were closed. His expression calm. Connors sat beside him. "You waited," he whispered. "You stubborn bastard, you waited." He brushed snow off the body with trembling hands. A medic approached. "We'll take him, son." Connors nodded, but he didn't move. Not until they lifted Reed gently and carried him away. The general's words later that afternoon, General McAuliffe gathered as many men as could stand in the town square. A place now reduced to rubble, blackened wood, burned-out vehicles, and shattered glass. He stood on the hood of a destroyed jeep. His breath hung in the air as he spoke. "Men, you held the line. You held when no one believed you could. You stood when every force in this war tried to break you." He looked at the faces, hollow, frost-bitten, sleepless, resolute. You were abandoned by the weather. You were outnumbered. You were surrounded. But you did not bend. You did not break. He paused. You proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to give in to it. The men said nothing. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke louder than any cheer. The long walk out within days. The 101st Airborne was ordered forward, deeper into the Ardennes, toward new battles, new towns, new lines of fire. They marched past burned tanks, broken trees, wrecked houses, German bodies, American bodies, all covered with snow. Some soldiers limped. Some leaned on rifles as crutches. Some marched barefoot inside torn boots. But they marched. Hanley looked back at Bastogne one last time. The town that had become a fortress, a graveyard, and a legend. "Ghosts of Bastogne," he murmured, and he was right. They had entered as soldiers. They left as something else. Something forged in cold and fire. Something carved from ice and stubbornness. Something history would never forget. The Legion years later, veterans of Bastogne would speak of the battle in voices softened by time, but their eyes would harden, just for a moment. They would speak of snow that swallowed bodies, trees that exploded, tanks that came like iron beasts, nights that froze souls, friends who never woke, miracles that fell from the sky, courage that should not have been possible. They would say, "We weren't heroes. We were just cold." But history knew better. History remembered. Because Bastogne was not just a battle. It was a curse, a promise, a test, a triumph, a place where men refused to die, a place where ghosts walked, a place where winter itself bowed its head. Pulag, the forest of bones today, the Ardennes is quiet. Birds nest in the branches where snipers once waited. Green leaves hide the scars of shells. Deer wander through spaces where tanks burned. Children play in fields where men bled. Snow falls gently where it once fell like a shroud. But if you walk deep into the forest, and if the wind is right, and if the night is cold, you might hear something, a crunch of boots on ice, a whisper, a breath, the echo of men who should not have survived but did. The Ghosts of Bastogne, still holding the line, forever.